Welcome back to the Use Your Head podcast. Today we're going to talk a little bit about something I've been thinking about, both-sides-ism. I saw an article, a couple of people in the media around pundits and so forth talking about this thing called both-sides-ism. So I wanted to discuss that a little bit. I did a little reading and thinking about that, and we'll do that on the Use Your Head podcast today. My name is John McLean. Thanks for joining in wherever you are around the world. I am a postulant for holy orders in God's one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and studying to become a deacon. Met with the bishop just the other day, and things are on track. I'm very, very pleased with how my studies and postulancy are going right now. We'll talk more about that as we move closer. Still have a ways to go, but I'm grateful for the progress being made there as I seek to really spend the rest of my vocational life serving in ministry and doing other things as well. As we talked about last time, vocation is a broad and vast thing. It's an adventure with many, many vocations, and I'm no exception to that. Before we get into today's discussion, I wanted to give you a little audiobook preview of a project that I am working on as an audiobook narrator. I do still do that, just because the old audiobook show ended, and I don't narrate as much as I used to because I have other things going on. I do still do it from time to time when an interesting project comes along, and I have been blessed this year with a couple of really good ones. I've mentioned in the past the book by David Klinghoffer called Plato's Revenge is a really short, I think it wound up being 4.5 hours. So that's a short book, but it is really a lot of bang for your buck, if you will. It's a great, great book. Klinghoffer writes about the science behind the immaterial genome, which is a really fascinating area where scientists in genetics are discovering that the genome actually is immaterial in nature, which opens up an entirely new avenue of study in terms of creation theology. Very, very interesting. Called Plato's Revenge. It's available very shortly. It's complete, but it hasn't been released yet, but you can find that at audiobooks.com or on my website, johnmcleanaudiobooks.com. Or audiobooks by John. That way you don't have to spell my name. The one I'm working on right now is one I wanted to tell you about. It's by an historian named Raymond Ibrahim. He's a brilliant writer and historian, and I've done a couple of his books before. The one I'm working on now is his new book called Two Swords of Christ. And if you've ever been curious about the Knights of the Temple and the Knights of the Hospital, we call them Templars and Hospitallers, in the 12th and 13th centuries, fascinating read. Actually, the 10th and 11th centuries, really. That period of history where the Crusades were happening is very controversial, and there's a lot of revisionist history that goes on about the Knights Templar and the things that went on. And, there's some intrigue there, but the actual history is fascinating to read. If you want to read about true heroism, and people that truly pick up the cross, I mean really, and chuck it all, as we say, and put their faith, their boots on the ground. It is a really inspiring and fascinating history called Two Swords of Christ. It's going to take me a while to finish it. This one's going to run about 15 hours, so it's a deep dive. But if you're into that kind of history, I highly recommend it. Raymond Ibrahim is not just a thorough and very fair historian, he's also a great writer and really brings the history alive in his work. I'm very privileged to be reading his work for audio, so I'll let you know as we get closer. I'm just really just in the first fourth of this book. I'm already head over heels in love with it. It's wonderful. So really, and I think it's important that we get this type of history into people's hands and ears in this format. We need to know what happened, because we can be inspired by those that went before us very, very often if we get the true story. And Ibrahim is always very careful to be balanced. His scholarship is dead on great, and he's really, really good. So Two Swords of Christ coming soon. I want to talk about this both-sides-ism idea. In the wake of the assassination, the martyrdom of Charlie Kirk, which, we're still smarting from that and will be for some time. I think it's a real historical moment. But I want to focus on what's being called both-sides-ism. There is a call from the left saying that, well, listen, the whole message has been, well, everybody needs to tone down the rhetoric, right? We need to tone down the fiery language. You need to turn the temperature down. We've heard these kind of metaphoric statements. And on the surface, you say, well, yes, that would be great because everybody's just so angry right now and everything is so sensitive. It's a powder keg in our culture. And I'm not saying that's not true. Obviously, in many ways, that is true. But the idea is that, well, yeah, we need to turn down the rhetoric, but only if you will. And so there's this equity idea that has crept in. And I wanted to talk about the difference between equity and equality. Because our nation, our founders based our society on this idea of equality. And what we've done in the age of moral relativism, where we remove any type of moral judgment from the discussion, we now have this thing called equity, where everything is morally equal. And that is untrue. That is untrue. Our founders knew it, and their message of equality has been perverted to this idea that if it feels good, do it, and no one has any right to make any moral judgment whatsoever. And if you do that, you're a racist, bigot, homophobe, this and that, a phobe, whatever. And that accusation's been hurled at Charlie Kirk posthumously by some who, there's actually some rather despicable people out there saying that he deserved what he got, all this kind of just terrible, yucky stuff. And so they're saying, okay, well, we'll turn down the rhetoric, but you have to also. Now, I want to preface this discussion by saying that I'm not claiming that there is no, harmful rhetoric coming from the right. And in fact, even from many Christians who kind of lose their tempers and go over the line in speaking in a Christian way, in a loving way. That doesn't mean that we're milquetoast, but that means that there is a certain way that we should speak. And so, yes, we could deliver our message in a better way in some instances on the right side of the fence. I'm going to just admit that, okay? But that doesn't give everyone permission to make this argument that there is no moral judgment. Equity means that we say everything is equal, every opinion, every ideology is equal because there's no moral judgment. And that is insanity. We must have moral judgment. Because what happens when we say that? What are we really saying? In other words, without moral judgment, man is his own God. And we're back in the garden again. Because isn't that what the serpent told Eve? Now, the only reason God doesn't want you to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is because then you'll be like he is. He doesn't want that, right? You can be like he is, just eat of the tree. And then you'll have all the knowledge he has. Tempting our first parents to become their own gods. And that is the original sin that has put us where we are today. So we shouldn't go there. We must have moral judgment, and morality is not relative. There is a wrong side. And yes, we must judge that as wrong and assign it as thus, and do our best to either convert or eliminate those ideologies from our culture. If we don't, we have what we're seeing today. Equality, true equality, must include a moral judgment. This is how we defined our culture at the founding. Look at our founding documents. The Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson, who was kind of the father of this separation of church and state idea, he said, look, we're going to base our rights don't come from government. Despite what Tim Kaine has been saying, he was talking about how it's very troubling to think that our rights don't come from government. Well, pardon me, sir. I find the opposite to be true. I think everyone can agree, no matter what you believe, that our government is imperfect. In fact, it's often dreadfully so. Are we going to really trust fellow man to assign? No, our rights come from God, who gave us personhood and created us in his own image. Our founders understood that truth. And that's where the concept of equality, equal under God, comes from. But if we take God out of that equation, we become animals, don't we? Animals don't have moral judgment. That's not their created order. That's not how they were created. They are created to survive. And so if you are hungry and you see another animal that is eating food and you want that food and you think you can pull it off, you're going to kill that other animal and take the food. That's culture without moral judgment. And that's what we're seeing today. Somebody says things that make you feel bad or or expose the light of your sinful lifestyle or whatever, makes you uncomfortable for any reason, just kill them. That's what happens with equity when we remove moral judgment. And there is a stark difference between that and the equality that our founders envisioned for our country. And probably why many of those founders really didn't have much hope that the United States would ever come to be. Many of them said this is never going to work. Men can never agree on this. And God blessed the idea, and we have existed. But now we've removed him. And we talked about this last time on the program. Now we're seeing us revert to animals, animal-like behavior. I mean, we see it all the time. I saw a video this morning. Yet another cruise ship had just left port. A cruise ship where you're supposed to have fun and relax and, enjoy a little bit of luxury and have a good time and get away from it all. And they're not even hardly out of port yet. And a brawl breaks out. And they have to turn around and go back and get the people up. It's animal-like behavior. It's Lord of the Flies. That's not who we are as a civilized human race. God gave us instructions to keep that from happening. And when we toss those instructions out the window and call them old-fashioned or bigoted or unfair or unequal or what have you, then we end up with this type of behavior. Because here's the truth. We are not equal to our Creator. He's bigger. He's greater. He's smarter. He's sovereign. We are his creatures. And we must obey him. If we don't, disaster is the result. The wages of sin is death, and we're seeing that all around us. And I've seen many people that in the past didn't believe that, have now come around and said, you know what? I've rethought that. I see it on social media every day. And I'm not on social media much, but it seems like every time, I have a 15-minute time limit set for my social media for the day. That's just a boundary. My phone cuts me off. I use that screen time or whatever feature. But I have seen in that short amount of time every day, people posting going, I've been doing some hard thinking in the wake of and you know what? All this time that I've said, the wages of sin of death, is death? What a crock. I'm starting to see a lot of death result from sinful behaviors, lifestyles, ideologies. We have, as a culture, allowed the idea from our founding of equality to be perverted into something called equity. Here's another way to look at that. We hear this all the time. So-and-so is a threat to our democracy. Our democracy is under siege. Our democracy is at risk. And while this may seem like picking nits, if you think back to your civics class in 7th grade or 8th grade, I forget, I think 8th grade was when I had civics for the first time, we were taught a very important concept about the founding of our government in the United States. We're not a democracy. Now, our system of government is based on the idea of democracy, which goes way back into Old England, right, where people can vote. Those concepts feed into, but the United States of America is not a democracy. Democracy means mob rule. The most votes wins every time, and there's nothing else that goes into that. Sounds a lot like equity, doesn't it? I mean, when you have a tiny, tiny sliver of the population that believes in a certain ideology, but they're willing to burn cities and loot stores and shoot at police officers and riot and burn and pillage and act in an outrageous way so that the media can't possibly ignore them and they're constantly on the internet, they look big and loud. That's mob rule. The United States is a representative republic because our founders were wise enough to know that mob rule means that the biggest and richest and loudest and toughest are going to get their way, and there's no way that there's going to be any hope of equality in that type of system. Again, we go back to the animals. If you've got a pack of 8 wolves facing a pack of 4 wolves, who's going to win that fight? We're not animals. We're human beings made in the image of God. And our founders knew that we could do better, and we should. And so they created this representative republic. The most amazing experiment in terms of government ever attempted on the face of the earth. And for almost 250 years, we have survived a number of pretty catastrophic things. Civil War, World War. And now we have this cancerous ideology growing from within that we're struggling with. The way out is to go back to our founding and to remember what it's really about. All men are created equal, but that's because of how that's defined by God, our Creator. All right, that is from where that is the source of our rights, not government. Our founding documents merely protect the rights that God gave to each human being. And yes, we've stumbled. Yes, because every time I say this, the argument comes, well, what about the 1800s when we had chattel slavery? Yes, I'm not saying we're perfect. We blew a lot of things. But by the way, that didn't start here. That was imported here. And we fought a bloody war to, among other things, remove that from our culture. The point is this. Without moral judgment as a society, we become animals. And that's the answer. Because what are people asking? How could people behave like this? What are we, a bunch of animals? Yeah, that's what happens when we take this, our founding idea of equality, and remove God, remove moral judgment, remove the 10 Commandments, remove biblical teaching from our culture. And we have to be careful and not make this a theocratic idea. Our founders were very clear, especially Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration, was very clear. This is not going to become a country where we have a state religion and everyone must know you are free to worship as you please. But that's not the same thing as assigning equal moral weight to every ideology, every belief out there. There's been controversy about 10 Commandments monuments at state capitals. So then the Satanic Temple comes and they put their, demonic statue there and says, well, we have the right to do that. No, you don't. Because that's not the founding. We have moral judgment. There is a right side and there is a wrong side. And that's defined by what our founders said, by God. And we find God in his scriptures, in his holy word. He is the truth. And when we say, no, I don't think so, I'm not on board with that because the Constitution says that I have the right to worship whatever, so I can toss that aside, we become animals. And that's what's happened. That's why people are just saying, you know what, I don't like the way you talk. You offended me, so I'm going to shoot you. And it's escalated from, I'm going to say bad things about you and call you names, all the way up to, now you know what? No, you've offended me. I'm just going to kill you. Is that the culture we want? Because I'm going to tell you, that's the culture Satan wants us to have. And when we allow, the thing is, evil creeps in when good men do nothing. And that's true. It's that whole coasting downstream metaphor that I think about a lot. On the inner tube. This is a fallen world. And the prince of this world, Satan, has got the river running right down to where. And if you just float on that, that's where you're going to wind up. The good, moral Christian life is swimming upstream, and it's not easy. And in a culture that is drifting, the river is flowing faster and faster, it seems. You got to swim harder and harder. And look, that's what Charlie Kirk did. Okay. He swam hard upstream courageously, and it killed him for it. So when you hear people say, this idea of both-sides-ism, I staunchly disagree. There is a wrong side. Now, I'll temper that answer with the fact that, yes, we can do a better job. Those of us on the right side of history can do a better job at being more loving. On the other hand, and this came to light, by the way, as I'm narrating this book about the Templars. I mean, the Templars decided that, look, if we have any hope of survival, we've got to fight on the level of the enemy. Not to do a spoiler alert or anything, but the Templars were founded by a couple of knights who were very wealthy. In those days, and to be a knight meant that you were a landowner, and you had probably a lot of farms and castles and servants, and, you were somebody. You had great wealth. A couple of knights that were war heroes from the First Crusade decided that they couldn't sit by and watch pilgrims who were heading to the Holy Land being slaughtered by Muslim bandits. And they chucked it all and founded the temple, the Knights of the Temple, the Templars. And because there was a right side and a wrong side. They believed that, and many of them died in horrible ways. Martyrs' deaths to defend it. So in 2025, here in the United States, we're faced with a similar choice. Are we going to allow this both-sides-ism, equity, nonsense, which I think is pretty clear is ridiculous, right? There are things being paraded before the eyes of our children that are obviously perversions and are obviously very contrary to what God has set up for us to live a peaceful and organized life according to his created order. It's paganism. It's animal-like behavior. And we are in a cultural moment right now where we're going to face, what are we going to choose? Are we going to finally decide that this is not how things are going to be? Are we going to return to the Judeo-Christian ethic that our founders founded our country on, that has been blessed by God and allowed to survive turmoil for 2.5 centuries? Or are we going to float down the river? Are we going to decide that we don't have the belly for the fight? That's where we are. So to those of you who say that, yeah, you know what, both sides are equally culpable in this, I heartily disagree. There's a wrong side. We must have moral judgment in our culture. That's all I've got for you today. I want to give you the email address if you'd like to enter the discussion. I always love to hear from you. It's john@useyourheadpodcast.com. Be happy to hear from you, and I'd be happy to have you join us next time on the Use Your Head podcast. God bless you. My name is John McLean. Hope you've enjoyed today's discussion. Again, my email is john@useyourheadpodcast.com. I wish you a peaceful day. God bless. We'll see you next time on the Use Your Head podcast. Bye-bye for now.